Emperor Vexthor sat motionless on his throne, a massive structure carved from black obsidian that seemed to swallow light itself. Veins of something that looked like frozen fire ran through the dark stone, pulsing faintly with each breath the dragon took. He was enormous even by the standards of his kind. His scales shimmered like molten copper in the dim light of the throne room, and his wings, folded behind him, could have wrapped around a small building. 300 years. That's how long it had been since he'd accepted a single gift from anyone. The throne room was quiet now, except for the shuffling footsteps of another failed delegation making their way toward the exit. Their leader, some dignitary from a world whose name Vexthor hadn't bothered to remember, clutched a rolled bundle of fabric to his chest. Silks from the Weaver Moons, supposedly the finest in the known galaxy. Each thread was supposed to be woven by creatures that lived for only a single day, spending their entire existence creating one perfect strand. The delegation had probably spent years acquiring enough to make a proper gift. The Emperor hadn't even glanced at it. The massive doors sealed shut behind them with a sound like thunder, and silence returned to the chamber. Below the palace, deep in vaults that stretched for miles, their offering would join countless others. Quantum sculptures that sang songs in colors human eyes couldn't see. Living crystals that held the recorded memories of civilizations that had gone extinct 1,000 years ago. Crowns forged from the compressed hearts of collapsed stars. Paintings that showed different images depending on who looked at them. Weapons that could crack planets. Technologies that could extend life indefinitely. All of it gathering dust in the dark. All of it worthless to him. From the shadows near one of the massive pillars, Ambassador Ryan Carter watched the rejected delegates leave. He'd been standing there for almost an hour, waiting for his chance to approach. His hands were sweating inside his gloves, and he kept having to remind himself to breathe normally. Why does he refuse everything? Ryan whispered to his companion, Captain Jennifer Hayes, who stood beside him trying to look professional despite her obvious nervousness. Before Jennifer could answer, a figure approached them from deeper in the shadows. Reshala, the Emperor's chief advisor, moved with an eerie grace that made it hard to tell if she was walking or floating. Her body was made entirely of some kind of living crystal that caught and refracted the light in strange ways. When she spoke, her voice sounded like wind chimes being played by a gentle breeze. Because in 8 centuries of existence, the Emperor has learned something that most beings never understand, she said, stopping a few feet away from the two humans. No one gives without expecting something in return. Every gift that enters this palace is really a transaction hiding behind a pretty bow. A bribe wearing a smile. A chain disguised as generosity. Ryan felt his stomach drop. He'd spent the last 6 months personally selecting items to bring from Earth. Rare metals that didn't exist on most worlds. Complete digital archives of human history, art and music spanning thousands of years. A handwritten manuscript from Dr. Patricia Wong, the Nobel Prize winner who'd cracked the secrets of faster-than-light travel. Things that represented the best of what humanity had achieved. And if what this crystalline being said was true, all of it would be as meaningless to the Emperor as everything else. We still request an audience, Ryan said, forcing his voice to stay steady. He straightened his shoulders and looked directly at where he thought the Emperor sat, though it was hard to see clearly from this distance. Humanity is new to the stars. We're still learning how things work out here. We need allies. Jennifer shot him a look that clearly said, "Are you crazy?" but stayed quiet. Reshala's crystalline head tilted slightly as if she were studying them. "At least you're honest about your needs," she said after a moment. "Most delegations spend hours pretending they just want friendship or cultural exchange. You may present your offerings tomorrow at the second sun's rising. But I advise you to prepare for disappointment. The Emperor has rejected gifts from civilizations that had mastered space travel before your ancestors learned to make fire." With that, she turned and glided away, her crystalline form gradually disappearing into the shadows of the vast chamber. Ryan and Jennifer stood there for a moment in silence. "Well," Jennifer finally said, "that went about as well as expected." "We're not done yet," Ryan replied, though he wasn't sure he believed his own words. "Tomorrow we get our shot. That's all we can ask for." What neither of them knew, what no one except Vexthor himself knew, was that humans had already done something unprecedented. When they'd requested permission to dock at the Imperium's border station for emergency repairs, they'd mentioned something in passing. Something that hadn't been seen in the Crimson Imperium in 3 centuries. Children. The human ship carried 200 orphans being transported to a new colony world. Their hyperdrive had fractured mid-journey, and they desperately needed repairs. Most species would have hidden this vulnerability, would have found another way, would never have admitted they were traveling with their most precious and defenseless cargo. But humans had simply asked for help, and mentioned the children because it affected their timeline. And Emperor Vexthor, for reasons he didn't fully understand himself, had authorized the repairs. Free of charge. No conditions attached. It was the first genuinely free thing he'd given in 300 years, and he wasn't entirely sure why he'd done it. Something about the concept of children, a concept his own species didn't really have, stirred something in the ancient dragon's chest. Something he'd thought had died a long time ago. Curiosity. The next morning came too quickly for Ambassador Ryan Carter. He stood in the throne room again, this time with his entire presentation ready to go. His team had worked through the night making sure everything was perfect. The holographic displays floated in the air between him and the Emperor, showing off Earth's best offerings in brilliant detail. First came the precious metals. Platinum refined to absolute purity, something that was apparently rare in this part of the galaxy. The hologram showed the molecular structure, the potential uses, the sheer value of what they were offering. Ryan explained how it could revolutionize certain manufacturing processes. Emperor Vexthor's golden eyes passed over it without interest. Next came the art. Paintings from human masters spanning thousands of years. The Mona Lisa. Starry Night. Works that represented the pinnacle of human creativity and expression. The holograms rotated slowly, showing every brushstroke in perfect detail. The Emperor didn't even blink. Finally, Ryan presented the medical research. Revolutionary treatments that could cure diseases affecting dozens of species. Dr. Patricia Wong's breakthrough work on cellular regeneration that could save millions of lives across the galaxy. This was the one Ryan had the most hope for. Surely saving lives would matter. The Emperor's massive claw tapped once against his throne's armrest. That was the only movement he made. Rejected, Vexthor said, and his voice sounded like two mountains grinding against each other. Ryan had prepared himself for this outcome, but actually hearing the words still hit him like a physical blow. 6 months of work. The hopes of all humanity. Everything they'd carefully selected and prepared. All dismissed with a single word. But Ryan hadn't become Earth's chief ambassador by giving up easily. Your Majesty, if I may ask, what would you accept? He kept his voice respectful but firm. What could humanity possibly offer that you haven't already seen? We're trying to understand. We want to do this right. For the first time since Ryan had entered the throne room, the Emperor actually moved. He leaned forward slightly, and the motion made his scales catch the light in rippling waves. His eyes, which had seemed almost bored before, now focused on Ryan with an intensity that was almost frightening. Ambassador, I have existed for 800 years, Vexthor said slowly. I have been offered treasures you cannot imagine. The hearts of dying stars, captured and preserved. The dreams of poets somehow made physical. Ancient civilizations have offered me their greatest works. Warrior races have offered me their eternal loyalty. Romantic species have offered me their love. His claw tapped again, a sound like a hammer on stone. Every single time, those offerings came with invisible strings attached. The treasures came with requests for military protection. The loyalty came with expectations of trade deals. The love came with demands for political alliance. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. So tell me honestly, Ambassador Ryan Carter, if I reject everything you've brought today, will humanity still consider me an ally? Ryan hesitated. This was the moment where he could be diplomatic, where he could spin the truth into something prettier. But something told him that this ancient being would see right through any deception. He chose honesty. Probably not, Your Majesty, Ryan admitted. We're struggling out here. We're new to space and we don't understand half the politics or dangers. We need friends. We need allies. I'd love to tell you that we'd be your friend no matter what, but the truth is, we need your help to survive. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Then something strange happened. The corner of the Emperor's mouth twitched upward, just slightly. It might have been the dragon equivalent of a smile. At least you're honest, Vexthor said, and there was something almost like approval in his voice. Most ambassadors dance around the truth for hours. You may stay at the repair station for 3 days while your ship is fixed. Your children will be safe here. That much I give freely with no expectations. Ryan left the throne room feeling confused but strangely hopeful. It wasn't an alliance, but it wasn't a complete rejection either. Something about that conversation felt different from what he'd expected. Meanwhile, at the repair station several miles away, life continued for the 200 human children waiting for their ship to be fixed. Most of them stayed in the residential section, a comfortable area set up with beds, games, and food. The caretakers did their best to keep everyone calm, though many of the younger kids were scared by the strange aliens they sometimes saw passing by. 7-year-old Lily Martinez wasn't scared though. She was sitting at a table in the common room, her precious box of crayons spread out in front of her. The box was old and dented, and several of the crayons were broken down to nubs, but they were hers. They were all she had left from before. She'd been listening earlier when Captain Jennifer had gathered all the kids to explain their situation. Jennifer had said something that stuck in Lily's mind. The Emperor is letting us fix our ship without making us pay for it. He didn't have to do that. We should be grateful. Lily knew exactly what that meant. Before the accident, before she'd lost her parents, her mother had taught her something important. When someone helps you, even if they're a stranger, you say thank you. That's what good people do. That's how you show you're grateful. So while the other children played games or watched videos on their tablets, Lily got to work. She pulled out her spiral notebook, the one with the faded unicorn on the cover, and opened to a fresh page. Her tongue poked out slightly from the corner of her mouth, the way it always did when she concentrated really hard. She started drawing. First, she made a large figure in the center of the page. She'd heard the adults talking about the Emperor being dragon-like, so she drew the biggest dragon she could manage. It wasn't very good, just a big body with wings and a long neck, but she tried her best. She gave him a crown because emperors wore crowns. She knew that from the storybooks back home. Then she added stars all around him. She used every color in her box: red, blue, yellow, green, purple, orange. She wanted it to be beautiful and bright, something that would make someone smile when they looked at it. "Whatcha making?" a voice asked. Lily looked up to see Ben, one of the older kids. He was 9 and sometimes acted like he was too cool to hang out with the younger children, but he was nice enough. "A thank you card," Lily said simply, going back to her coloring. "For the Emperor." Ben frowned. "Lily, he's like a giant dragon alien or something. He probably doesn't care about cards." "Mama said everyone likes being thanked," Lily replied with the absolute certainty that only a 7-year-old could have. "It's nice to be nice." Lily held Captain Jennifer's hand so tightly that her knuckles turned white. They were walking through palace corridors that seemed to stretch on forever, and she'd never seen anything so big in her entire life. The walls were covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly, and the ceiling was so high up she couldn't even see it properly. Every few steps, they passed these massive statues of warriors or creatures she didn't recognize. She wasn't sure if she was in trouble. Nobody had said she did anything wrong, but everyone was acting weird. Really weird. Captain Jennifer kept giving her these tight smiles that didn't reach her eyes. Ambassador Ryan walked on her other side, and even though he kept telling her everything was fine, she could see a little muscle in his jaw jumping like it did when grown-ups were stressed. Behind them walked about a dozen other people, human officials, alien advisors, even some guards. All because of her card. "Lily, sweetie, just be polite and answer his questions honestly," Jennifer whispered, leaning down as they walked. "You didn't do anything wrong. The Emperor just wants to meet you. That's all." "Am I in trouble?" Lily asked in a small voice. "No, baby. Not at all." Jennifer squeezed her hand. "Just be yourself, okay?" They rounded a corner and suddenly they were standing in front of 2 massive doors. These weren't like regular doors. They were easily 30 feet tall, made of some dark metal that seemed to absorb light, and covered in intricate carvings of battles and conquests. 2 guards stood on either side, tall, armored beings who didn't even glance down at her. The doors began to open, moving in complete silence despite their size. Lily's eyes went wide. The throne room was impossibly huge. It stretched out in front of them like a football field, with columns rising up on either side like a forest of stone. Light came from somewhere high above, casting everything in this dim golden glow. And at the far end, sitting on a throne that looked like it had been carved from a mountain, was the Emperor. He was so much bigger than Lily had imagined. So much bigger than any living thing had a right to be. His body was covered in scales that shimmered and shifted colors as he breathed, copper and gold and bronze all flowing together like liquid metal. His wings were folded behind him, but even folded they were massive, stretching up toward the ceiling. His claws rested on the armrests of his throne, each one as long as Lily was tall. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. They were golden and ancient and sad. Not mean. Not angry. Just sad, like he'd lost something important a long time ago and couldn't remember where he'd put it. "Come forward, young one," Emperor Vexthor said, and his voice was different from when he talked to Ambassador Ryan. It was still deep and rumbling like distant thunder, but gentler somehow. Softer around the edges. Lily felt Jennifer's hand start to follow her, but then let go. She was supposed to walk up there by herself. Her legs felt shaky, and her crayon box rattled slightly in her hands because she was trembling, but she started walking. The throne room was so big that it took almost a full minute to reach the base of the throne. Every step echoed in the silence. She could feel everyone watching her, all the guards, the advisors, the officials. But she kept her eyes on the emperor. When she reached the steps leading up to his throne, she stopped. She remembered seeing something in a movie once, about how you were supposed to curtsy to royalty. She wasn't exactly sure how to do it, but she tried her best, holding out the edges of her jacket like a skirt and bending her knees. The emperor's head tilted slightly as if he found this gesture curious. He reached out with one massive claw and Lily saw he was holding something. Her card. It looked so tiny and fragile in his enormous hand, but he was holding it carefully, like it was made of glass and might break. "You made this for me?" Vexthor asked. "Yes, sir." "I mean, Your Majesty," Lily said, her voice coming out quieter than she meant it to. "You helped fix our ship. Mama always said when someone helps you, you should say thank you. So, thank you." The emperor studied the card for a long moment, his golden eyes moving over the crayon drawing. The stick figure dragon. The wobbly crown. The colorful stars. "Why did you draw me holding your hand?" he asked. Lily shifted her feet, suddenly feeling shy. This was the part that might sound silly to a grown-up. Especially to an ancient dragon emperor who'd probably never held anyone's hand in his entire life. "'Cause you're scary big but you're not being mean to us," she said slowly, trying to find the right words. "I thought maybe you might be lonely up here all by yourself. The throne room is really big and really empty. So I wanted you to know that someone wants to hold your hand. If that's okay." The silence that followed was so complete that Lily could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The entire throne room seemed frozen in time. Then Emperor Vexthor did something that no one in that room had ever seen before. Something that hadn't happened in 300 years. He stood up from his throne. His full height was absolutely massive, his head nearly touching the ceiling, and then he began to descend the steps. Each movement was slow and deliberate, his scales catching the light with every step. When he reached the bottom, he didn't stop. He kept lowering himself, his massive body folding down until his head was level with Lily's. They were eye to eye now. His golden eyes, ancient and deep as oceans, looking directly into her brown ones. "Child, how old are you?" he asked softly. "7, Lily said. "Almost 7.5. And you made this just to thank me? You don't want anything in return?" Lily's eyebrows scrunched together in confusion. "Like what?" "Alliance. Protection. Wealth. Power." The emperor said each word slowly as if speaking a language he'd almost forgotten. "Something for you. Something for your people. Something that makes this card into a transaction." "I just wanted to say thank you," Lily said simply. "That's what nice people do." Emperor Vexthor closed his eyes. His massive shoulders shook slightly, and a sound came from deep in his chest, not quite a sob but something close. When he opened his eyes again, there was wetness there, gathering in the corners. Lily had never seen a dragon cry before, but she thought maybe that's what this was. "I had forgotten," Vexthor said, his voice so quiet that only Lily could hear him. "I had completely forgotten." "Forgotten what?" Lily asked. "That kindness could exist without conditions. That gratitude could be real. That someone could give simply because they wanted to, not because they expected something back." His claw, so large it could have crushed her without effort, reached out and very, very gently touched the top of her head. "You reminded me, little one. You reminded me of something I lost a long time ago." A single tear rolled down the emperor's scaled face, and Lily watched it fall, catching the light as it dropped. "Thank you," the emperor whispered. "Thank you for your card." Over the following months, something impossible happened. The entire galaxy watched in complete disbelief as Emperor Vexthor, the being who'd rejected every gift for 300 years, began to change. Started with something small. So small that most people didn't notice it at first. A children's drawing appeared on the wall behind his throne. It was Lily's card, placed in a simple frame and hung right there among the ancient war banners and imperial seals that had decorated the throne room for centuries. The contrast was absurd. Battle standards from the conquest of Andromeda hung next to a crayon drawing of a stick-figure dragon. Weapons that had slain legendary beasts were displayed beside colorful stars drawn by a 7-year-old. Then another drawing appeared. And another. Within weeks, the throne room began to look different. Less like a monument to power and more like someone actually lived there. The real shock came when the Emperor made an announcement that sent ripples through every corner of known space. The human orphans would be given permanent residence on Haven's Rest, a beautiful planet within the Crimson Imperium. They'd have the finest schools, the best housing, access to medical care and technology that humanity could barely dream of. But more than that, and this was the part that made diplomats from 1,000 worlds nearly faint, the children would have regular, personal visits with the Emperor himself. Every week, Emperor Vexthor cleared 2 hours from his schedule. His advisors called it cultural exchange in the official records, probably because they didn't know what else to call it. But really, it was just the Emperor sitting with Lily and her friends, learning to draw with crayons. And he was absolutely terrible at it. "Mr. Vex, you're pressing way too hard again," Lily said with the patience of a teacher who'd explained the same thing a dozen times. She watched as the Emperor snapped his third red crayon that afternoon. The poor crayon didn't stand a chance against those massive claws. "You gotta be gentle. Light touches." "My apologies," Vexthor rumbled, his voice vibrating through the floor. He picked up another crayon, blue this time, and tried again, moving his claw with a delicacy that seemed physically impossible for something so large. "What am I making again?" "A sunset," Lily said brightly. "See, Ben drew the sun over there and Rachel did those clouds and you're doing the mountains. We're all making it together. It's a group project." The Emperor squinted at the paper in front of him, trying to understand how mountains were supposed to look purple. "Mountains are purple?" "At sunset they are," Lily said with absolute certainty. "Trust me." At the corner of the room, Reshala stood watching with her crystalline form pulsing in colors that indicated deep confusion mixed with wonder. She'd served Emperor Vexthor for 200 years. She'd seen him lead armies, negotiate treaties that reshaped the galaxy, and make decisions that affected trillions of lives. She had never seen him snap crayons while trying to color mountains purple. There was no strategic value to this. No political purpose. No hidden agenda. He was just creating something with children. For fun. Ben, who was 9 and had initially thought the whole thing was weird, had completely changed his opinion over the past few weeks. He decided that Mr. Vex was actually pretty cool, even if he couldn't draw to save his life. "Mr. Vex, did you really conquer the whole Void Fleet by yourself?" Ben asked, looking up from his part of the sunset drawing. "With help from my armada, yes," Vexthor replied carefully, so carefully, trying to color inside the lines of his mountain. The purple crayon was holding up better than the red one had. It was a difficult campaign. "That's so cool." Ben's eyes lit up. "Could you tell us about it? Like what happened?" And so the Emperor told stories while coloring. Real stories, not the cleaned-up versions that appeared in history books. He told them about the Battle of the Shattered Moon, where his fleet had been outnumbered 10-1. About the time he'd personally led a boarding party onto an enemy flagship because his soldiers were pinned down. About the brilliant strategies and the terrible mistakes and the moments of pure luck that had made the difference between victory and defeat. But he also told them about other things. Things he'd never spoken about before. He told them about the loneliness of command. About making decisions that cost lives and having to live with those choices. About winning battles but losing friends. About how victory parades felt empty when there was no one you really cared about to celebrate with. "I built an empire," Vexthor said quietly, still coloring his purple mountain. "But I did it alone. After a while I forgot how to let anyone in. I built walls around my heart so high that nothing could climb over them. I thought that made me strong." "Did it?" asked Rachel, one of the quieter kids who usually just listened. "No," the Emperor said simply. "It made me lonely. For 300 years I was the most powerful being in this sector of space and I was completely alone." He glanced at Lily, who was working on adding birds to her part of the sunset picture. "Until a very stubborn 7.5-year-old sent me a card and reminded me that there were more important things than power." Lily looked up and grinned. "I'm almost 8 now." "My apologies." A very stubborn almost 8-year-old. These weekly sessions became legendary across the galaxy. At first, other species thought it was some kind of elaborate trick. Surely the Emperor had an ulterior motive. Maybe he was studying humans to find their weaknesses. Maybe it was psychological warfare. But as the months went on, the truth became undeniable. There was no trick. The Emperor genuinely just wanted to spend time with the children. Ambassadors from other species started requesting audiences again, curious about what had changed. What they found shocked them even more than the rumors had suggested. The throne room was barely recognizable. Children's artwork covered almost every available wall space. A whole table had been set up in one corner with art supplies, Crayons, markers, colored pencils, watercolors, construction paper, glitter glue. The Emperor himself had a permanent smudge of blue crayon on one of his claws that he apparently hadn't noticed or didn't care about. When Ambassador Ryan returned for a follow-up meeting, he actually stopped in his tracks when he entered the throne room. A child's painting of a rainbow hung right next to the legendary Sword of Andromeda. A macaroni art project, somehow involving alien pasta but the same basic concept, was displayed on a pedestal that used to hold a crown worth more than most planets. Ambassador Ryan, Vexthor greeted him and his voice was warm. Actually warm. The dragon who'd barely acknowledged Ryan's presence months ago now sounded genuinely happy to see him. Thank you for coming. I wanted to personally express my gratitude for bringing your people to my domain. Ryan blinked. Your Majesty, we should be thanking you. You've given us more than we ever hoped for. You've given me more, Vexthor said simply. He gestured to a drawing on the wall, clearly done by his own clawed hand, crude and childish but earnest. It showed a large dragon surrounded by small figures, all holding hands in a circle. Lily says I'm getting better at drawing. I suspect she's being kind, but I appreciate it nonetheless. Ryan couldn't help but smile. Your Majesty, if I may ask, what changed? Why did a child's card reach you when centuries of diplomacy failed? The Emperor was quiet for a moment, looking at all the artwork surrounding his throne. Because Lily didn't see an emperor or a strategic ally, Vexthor finally said. She saw someone who helped her and wanted to say thank you. There was no calculation. No hidden agenda. Just honest gratitude from a child who'd been taught that kindness deserves recognition. He looked directly at Ryan. That kind of genuine authenticity is rarer than any treasure in my vaults. And apparently humanity still has it. 2 years passed since that first crayon card changed everything. In that time, the galaxy had shifted in ways that no one could have predicted. The changes weren't loud or dramatic. No wars were fought, no territories were conquered. But something fundamental had transformed in how the different species viewed each other and themselves. Humanity's position in the interstellar community had completely changed. 2 years ago, they'd been desperate newcomers, barely holding on, begging for scraps of help from anyone who'd listen. Now they were respected members of the galactic community. Not because they'd built massive fleets or discovered some incredible technology. Not because they'd gotten rich or powerful. They were respected because they'd done something that seemed impossible. They'd reminded the Dragon Emperor how to hope again. Lily was 9 years old now, and she still visited Mr. Vex every single week without fail. Her old crayon box, the battered one with the broken crayons, sat in a place of honor in her room, but she used a proper art set now. A really nice one with colored pencils and markers and watercolor paints and more shades of color than she'd ever dreamed existed. And she'd gotten good. Really good. Her drawings didn't look like stick figures anymore. She could do shading and perspective and all sorts of techniques she'd learned over the past 2 years. She'd even started teaching other kids from the orphanage, passing on what she'd learned. Their artwork didn't just decorate the throne room anymore. It was everywhere. Throughout the palace halls, in the gardens, in the official government buildings. Every corridor told a story through children's art, paintings of Earth, drawings of alien friends, sculptures of hope and dreams and imagination. Rachel had discovered a love for sculpting. She spent hours in the palace workshops with actual master craftsmen, artists who'd been perfecting their skills for centuries, and they treated her like a real apprentice. Her clay figures were becoming genuinely impressive. Ben had become absolutely obsessed with military history, specifically the Emperor's campaigns. He'd practically moved into the Imperial Library, devouring every book, every record, every battle report he could find. Vexthor had taken to discussing strategy with him, and Ben had the kind of mind that could see patterns others missed. Each child had found something they were passionate about, and the Emperor encouraged all of it. He'd learned something important over the past 2 years. Nurturing potential in others was far more valuable than hoarding power for yourself. On a cool morning in early spring, Emperor Vexthor sent out a summons. Ambassador Ryan, Captain Jennifer and 9-year-old Lily were all requested to come to the main palace plaza. The message was formal but gave no details about why. When they arrived, they found a massive crowd already gathered. Humans and aliens stood together, thousands of them, all facing toward the center of the plaza where a huge structure stood covered by a shimmering curtain of light. The structure was enormous, you could tell even with the covering, but its shape was impossible to make out. Lily held Jennifer's hand, confused but curious. What's going on? I don't know, sweetie, Jennifer admitted. I guess we're about to find out. Emperor Vexthor stood before the covered structure. his massive form somehow seeming less intimidating than it once had. Maybe it was because everyone had seen him covered in crayon marks and glitter glue too many times now. For 800 years, the emperor began, his voice carrying across the silent plaza, I built monuments to war, to conquest, to power. Statues of victories and memorials to battles won. Each one was meant to remind everyone who saw them that the Crimson Imperium was strong. That I was strong. That power was what mattered most. He paused, his golden eyes scanning the crowd. Today I unveil something different. Something that represents a different kind of strength entirely. The emperor raised one claw, and the shimmering light curtain dissolved into nothing. The crowd gasped as one. Rising 50 feet into the air was a sculpture unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was crafted from precious metals, gold and silver and copper all flowing together. Gemstones were embedded throughout, catching the sunlight and throwing rainbow reflections across the plaza. The craftsmanship was absolutely incredible, the kind of work that took master artisans years to complete. But what made everyone gasp wasn't the materials or the skill. It was what the sculpture showed. It was Lily's drawing. Her original crayon card, recreated in massive, permanent, beautiful detail. A stick-figure dragon with a wobbly crown. A tiny stick-figure girl. Their hands connected. Colorful stars surrounding them both, each one rendered in different gemstones. Rubies for red, sapphires for blue, emeralds for green. It was crude and simple and childish and absolutely perfect. At the base of the monument, carved in letters 2 feet tall, was an inscription. The gift of remembrance. A child reminded an empire that the greatest strength lies not in weapons, but in the courage to remain kind. Lily stared up at it, her mouth hanging open. She couldn't form words. Couldn't process what she was seeing. That was her drawing. Her stick figures. Her wobbly lines and her crayon stars.